Damn the police! What did they expect? A full physical description? My attacker was female, mid-30s probably. She wore a hat and dark glasses. You try guessing the age behind those two things. That description was the best I could do. I'm probably not making much sense. I'll begin at the start, and maybe that will make more sense. I sure hope by writing it all down it will make more sense to me. The shock of being assaulted for no reason in public was so far removed from anything that had ever happened to me that I just couldn't process it. Just a few short hours ago, I'd been on top of the world. I had a life I loved, including a beautiful house, comfortable bank accounts, and a husband who worshipped the ground I walked on. None of those were the reason I was glowing with happiness as I stepped out of the office at the end of the Monday workday. That was for a less public reason. Said husband was away on business for the week, and I had a date with my lover, John, just as soon as I could get home and get ready. John was a relatively recent acquisition and took me to places in bed that no man had ever done before. That's why I was walking with a skip to my step and a smile on my face as I headed toward my car in the office lot. I just reached it when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see who it was, hoping like hell it was John, and saw a fist coming straight at my face. I barely had time to glimpse an angry female face behind the fist before pain exploded from my mouth. Instinctively, I think, I dropped to the ground and rolled into the fetal position, allowing the woman, who never uttered a word, to kick my back. She must have tired of this at some stage because the next thing I knew, she was gone. Afraid she might return, I called the emergency number. An ambulance carted me to the hospital, where I caught a break. Being before the nightly rush, I was seen straight away. Apart from a split lip and some bruising, I was pronounced fine. With a vague warning to watch for the symptoms of delayed concussion and advice to ice pack my bruises, I was sent home. The police interviewed me in the waiting room after the medical staff was done with me, but with only a vague description of a slim, blonde-haired woman wearing a hat and dark glasses, there wasn't much hope of catching the crazy woman. I couldn't even tell them if she was a natural blonde, let alone provide a motivation for the attack. I asked them for a lift back to my car, but they explained it was against the rules. I attempted one of my helpless female smiles, but it hurt my lip too much. I tried ringing John to ask for a lift and beg off our evening tryst, but he didn't pick up, so I had no choice but to call a cab. My new plan for the evening was to pick up a bottle of painkiller, probably vodka, add some ice for the bruising, and have a long, hot bath until it was time to ring my husband after his workday. He always knew how to make sense of things for me and made me laugh when I felt down. After I told him what happened, I wouldn't be surprised if he dropped everything and drove the 4 hours home. I've always been his priority. I suppose I'd only been home 30 minutes or so. The bath was full and the ice was cooling my martini when there was a knock at the door. Thinking it was the delivery of the Chinese takeout I'd ordered, I opened it. When I woke, I had only vague memories of what happened. I tried to sit up, but my head hurt like hell. Easing my head back down, I felt my face. Something had dried on it. I scratched a bit off and looked at the scraping under my fingernail. Blood. Oh no. Gently and ever so carefully, I felt all over my face. Eyebrows, cheekbones, and jaw weren't gashed. My nose was sore but felt intact. I thanked the gods it didn't seem to be broken. I turned my head slowly. There was dried blood splatter on the floor, too. Whoever my attacker was, they must have hit me hard. I continued my explorations. The back of my head had a bump and felt bruised as well, probably where it hit the floor after I fell. Painfully, I lurched upright. My head protested. I slammed the door and staggered to the couch where I practically fell onto it. I think I hallucinated for a while, and my brain conjured up images that flitted across my mind, halfway between memories and movie-like frames. Definitely female, squat, with long black hair and almost bushy eyebrows. The rest of the face was obscured by a scarf. That's all I saw except for some sort of wooden handle or bat coming straight between my eyes. I woke, confused as hell, still on the couch. The clock above the mantelpiece said it was 4:25 a.m. My head hurt like hell. Any movement was like a bowling ball clanging around inside my skull, bashing against the sides. As I staggered into the kitchen, I felt pain in my groin. Whoever the woman was, she must have laid the boot into my groin. By the feel of it, it had landed on my left labia and inner thigh. I downed 2 painkillers and then reeled to the bathroom. The bathroom mirror didn't reveal a very pretty sight. Whatever had hit me had just missed my nose, but I had a bruised cheek and a black eye. Who the hell was that woman? And the other one this afternoon, yesterday? Despite being a real estate agent, I didn't think I'd made any enemies. Certainly not ones bad enough to belt me. What the hell was going on? I wondered if I should call another ambulance, but decided against it. The doctor yesterday afternoon had said to watch for delayed concussion for 8 hours. It was already longer than that since I was hit for the second time. I also debated calling the police, but again decided against it. Our front door wasn't visible from off the property, and I had even less to give them than last time. Still, one woman randomly attacking me was one thing, 2 were just bizarre. I decided, despite the late hour, to ring Dave. He'd know what to do. Oh, hell. Dave. What would he have thought when he tried to ring me last night, as he always did, and I didn't answer? He would have tried my cell and the house phone and then wondered where I was. I hope that didn't get him thinking that I was sneaking away from the house when he wasn't here. I'd always been incredibly discreet about my affairs. Wouldn't it be ironic if I was given away by a false clue? Picking up my cell, I checked to see how many missed calls I had from my husband. Odd, there were none. Picking up the home phone, I dialed the number for recent activity. The last unanswered call was from 3 days ago. What the... I couldn't remember the last time Dave hadn't spoken to me when he was away. In fact, it was part of my security arrangement that I normally rang him on his hotel phone, citing the alleged dangers of too much cell phone use, before going to meet my lover at a motel or, on very rare occasions, inviting him around here. That reminded me I'd rung John from my cell the previous afternoon and hadn't yet deleted the record. I wasn't stupid enough to have his number stored on my phone, and with no trail, there was no evidence. There were some photographs on it that should never see the light of day, but my phone was the only place they were stored and they were hidden on it. I'd also taken the precaution that it wasn't locked with a regular password or one of those pattern things, just my fingerprint and an enormous secure password. Dave thinks it's a work requirement to not share my password. On the rare occasion he needed to use my phone, I unlocked it for him and never let either of them out of my sight. I figured it was safer to store them on my phone, which I could protect, than on any other form of media that could be discovered. I deleted the call I'd made to John, left a message on his message bank, and noted that he hadn't returned my earlier call either. It was weird Dave hadn't rung. Despite the early hour, I rang him. I really needed to hear his comforting voice. It went straight to message bank, which was strange. Maybe he'd mislaid his charger, and his battery had gone flat or something. It wouldn't be the first time. By this time, it was after 5, and I had a 9 a.m. showing. There was no way I could turn up looking like I did, so I laid out more makeup than usual to cover it up. I had quite an array, after all. I should probably explain that. You see, all through high school, I'd been the plain one. You've all met her, the one that watched from the sidelines as all the boys she considered worth pursuing ignored her to chase the sporty, popular early developer girls. I'd prided myself on not being like some of the other plain ones, though. They'd put out to all and sundry in the mistaken belief that sexual popularity meant they'd made it. Thus, I was a virgin when I left school at 16. My parents weren't that ambitious for me, and gladly supported me in doing a series of night courses for this or that administrative qualification while I worked as a waitress in my free time. I actually lost my virginity to what I recognized too late as a clever I realized that when, after a quick, uncomfortable, what could only be called intimacy in his hotel room the next morning. He asked me to leave. I chalked that up to experience and thought the episode made me an expert at picking problems. It didn't. My next two liaisons ended similarly disastrously. The one after those was with a guy with less experience than me. I dumped him after the first night. That's the way I drifted through my life until I was 20. That's when Dave bumped into my life again. Dave had been a year ahead of me in school and, from the outside, was the male equivalent of me. He was tall and lean, but nothing else about him caught the eye. We got chatting at the restaurant I worked at, where he'd bought some clients for lunch. I knew enough after the first encounter to know he was a man with a clear career plan and the determination to get there. I accepted an invitation for a date, and the rest, as they say, is history. I slept with him about 2 weeks into our relationship, and it was obvious we were both so inexperienced that it was uncomfortable. However, we were both willing to learn and used each other to do exactly that. If I had to describe my life for the 12 months before my 21st birthday, I would have said contented. I had a guy who was obviously going places and who clearly loved me to death. We were never invited to the high-end social scene, but neither of us thought that was important. We'd moved into an apartment together, and I was doing a realtor's course, paid for by Dave, when my pivotal coming-of-age birthday arrived. Dave was celebrating his first big bonus check by spending a chunk of it on me. There was my own car, a voucher for 2 days with my own personal beauty consultant, and a larger diamond engagement ring than I'd ever expected to be wearing. I said yes at the right time, drove the car, and held off on the voucher. Oh, how I wish I'd just torn the damn thing up. That way I might have a husband whose phone wasn't turned off and an unbruised face. Dave reminded me of the voucher several times, but I threw myself into organizing a simple wedding, neither of us having a huge friend list. In the end, I decided to use it as a little pampering reward for myself to relax before the big day. That's when I found out what the voucher was actually for. It took me 2 days with Caroline. She was a 30-something, elegant-looking woman with I don't know what qualifications, but who had an amazing eye for how to showcase womanhood. The first port of call for us was a hairstylist, where I was pushed into a major remodel, and have to say, I was nervous about the result. The rest of that first day was spent shopping. Caroline walked me right past my usual favorite clothes shops to the classier end of town. Suffice it to say that by early afternoon, Caroline was using my phone to get Dave to perform some CPR on my credit card. At the end of the day, I looked in the mirror at my new hairdo and clothes and almost called Caroline to tell her not to bother the next day. The hair and clothes were for someone who was beautiful. Oh, why didn't I? The following day, we were at the salon by 8 a.m. I was pampered with a pedicure and manicure, facial and scalp massage. Then I was introduced to Colin. Colin was flamboyant and energetic, with a larger-than-life personality, and if you believed him, had once been the cosmetic attendant to some pretty big-name stars. He and Caroline used my face as a canvas to paint, sculpt, trim, and highlight for the next 2 hours, including several erasures. I wasn't allowed to see myself in a mirror until the two of them declared me perfect. When I stood and saw my reflection, I took an involuntary step backward. That's when Caroline's true genius was revealed. The clothes and hairdo that had looked out of place the previous day now framed a face that, I have to admit, was beautiful. I couldn't believe it. The change was stunning. Caroline forced me away from admiring my own reflection for a 2-hour cram session with Colin on how he'd revealed the natural masterpiece that was me. I thanked him and Caroline profusely for the life-altering experience. If I'd known how it was really going to affect me, I may have committed murder right there and then. Dave took an amusing double-take when I got home, but quickly recovered, telling me that the whole process had simply revealed the me he'd seen right from the start. That night was the wildest night we'd ever had in bed, and 3 days later, we were married. The reception and honeymoon were busy and confusing for me. Men, good-looking men, who had never given me a second glance in the past, were now vying for a chance to dance with me. I took them up on it whenever Dave didn't object. He was the first to admit dancing wasn't his favorite pastime. With all that attention, it still didn't really penetrate my psyche that the game had changed. That realization began when the wedding photograph album was delivered. I could see I was quite stunning, and for the first time, felt I'd married a little beneath myself. A fact that was obvious when you looked at us standing together in the various staged settings. I guess deep down, I still feel that today, which is neither logical nor fair. What had I achieved in the 5 years since my marriage compared to Dave? He'd built a business of his own from scratch and was well on his way to being a millionaire. I'd used my looks to become a mediocre seller of real estate. Despite the uneven scorecard, I did feel superior. 5 years. The months after the reveal of my true self had been like a rebirth. I'd become popular, complimented, entitled, and yes, within 6 months, an unfaithful wife. In my defense, it would have been extremely hard to never yield to temptation. All of a sudden, my mind still believed it was being carried around by a 5 out of 10 star body being hit on by 9 out of 10 star men. It took me waking up with the third such man to realize that they were just better-looking versions of the guy who had taken my virginity. From that time on, I was well and truly in the driver's seat when it came to choosing my lovers. So, in the bruised face here and now, I prepared to apply a good layer of concealer and foundation, feeling sorry for myself. I tried Dave's phone every 15 minutes or so with no luck at all. It took an hour and a half of layering until I had everything hidden to my satisfaction. I had no luck at all in either raising my husband or explaining the bizarre behavior of the two women. I made myself a coffee and drank it feeling lonelier than I had for years. I'd never made female friends easily, and with Dave not responding, I was isolated at my darkest hour. Having an hour to spare, I sent a text to John to call me when he could, then watched some mindless crap on the idiot box until it was time to leave for the office. Carrying my laptop bag and the flashy briefcase Dave had bought me last year out to my car in the detached garage, I put them on the back seat. Slamming that door, I turned toward the driver's door. I don't know where she came from. All I know is that she was standing full in front of me when I turned from the back door of my car. I can only assume she must have been hiding along the side of the garage wall outside or somewhere else when I first came in. Again, it all happened so quickly that it was hard to remember after it was all over. I recall falling to the ground and feeling a foot stomping on my arms and hands, which I'd instinctively raised to protect my face. The blows eventually stopped and I made a dash for the front door again. The ferocity of the attack was quite shocking, and my face stung. I rested for the briefest of moments against the locked door before stumbling to the downstairs bathroom. The mirror revealed 3 long scratches down my left cheek and 2 down the right, obviously caused by raking fingernails. My right hand and forearm were sore, but thankfully, nothing was broken. I rang the police again, then Dave and John while I waited for the cops to arrive. Neither answered. I felt so alone. Just after 9, the office rang to ask why I'd stood up to the client and were only slightly mollified when I told them I'd been attacked. Working for a realty company, they obviously assumed I was either lying or exaggerating the extent of my facial damage. As I suspected, the police weren't much use. In fact, I got the distinct impression that with murder and 2 armed robberies just yesterday, I was wasting their time with vague descriptions of a woman of average height with either red or auburn hair, which could be natural or dyed. Hard to tell when most of it was hidden under a baseball cap. They interviewed a couple of neighbors for appearance's sake, then left after asking me if I needed an ambulance. No, I didn't need a damn ambulance. I needed my husband to answer his phone so I could get comfort from his sweet voice for my utter confusion. I closed the door on the cops and walked into the lounge and yelled at the photo of Dave and me resting on the mantelpiece ledge. "You will take your phone charger next time, David, even if I have to pack the thing for you myself." Being attacked by 1 random woman wasn't that unusual. 2 was statistically improbable, but 3 was nigh on impossible, So it was time I thought really hard as to possible reasons why I'd made so many enemies. I couldn't. This time there was no amount of makeup that could hide the scratches. Worse still, I had to wipe the previously applied creams off with makeup remover pads so I could put some disinfectant on my new scratches. No telling what germs the psycho had under her fingernails. The pads burned like crazy, and the disinfectant felt like I'd poured petrol on my skin. The task was made even more difficult by the fact my right hand was beginning to seize up with the bruising. By the end, my face was red and blotchy, and the latest woman must have been wearing heels or something. There were distinctly shaped bruises forming on my hands and forearms. I tried Dave's phone again, desperately needing to hear his voice, but it went straight to the message bank again. Then I kicked myself. I could send him an email. When he retrieved it, he would hurry home for sure. The trouble was, my laptop was in my car. I lumbered down the stairs like a woman of 90. The bruises on my lower back, legs, and groin were doing their share of seizing up too. But when I went to turn the deadbolt on the front door, I just couldn't. Bad things waited out there. I berated myself for my cowardice. All those realtor seminars finally came to use. I gave myself a pep talk. What was inspiring the beatings was a mystery to me. But surely after 3 women venting their spleens on me for whatever reason, they were over. Probably a mistaken identity, that now I have come to think about it. I began looking at things logically. From the front door side of the house, I could see the door into the garage, but not inside it or beyond the wall on the far side. However, if I went out the back door, I could sneak around and approach the garage from an unexpected direction and catch anyone lying in wait. I shuffled from room to room, looking out windows and checking out the route around the house to the garage. The trouble was, there were a few blind spots where someone could be waiting, and besides, the backyard was very private. If someone accosted me there, they'd never be seen, and they could do whatever they liked to me with no witnesses. I wasn't exactly in any kind of shape to defend myself, let alone fight back. I was pondering all this when my phone rang. Dave, at last. I dashed for it, ignoring the protest from my bruised and battered limbs. I was disappointed. It wasn't Dave. It was my office. They'd managed to placate the client I'd stood up and organized for me to meet them at the property in 30 minutes. My excuses for being injured fell on deaf ears. They were running lean in these depressed times, and if I couldn't handle it, they let me know in no uncertain terms they could find a replacement who could. Bastards. That still left me with the problem of how to get to my car safely. A light bulb went off in my aching head. I'd call a cab. I did so, giving very specific instructions on parking in the middle of the driveway where I could see them from the house. There could still be someone hiding behind the garage or the hedge on the property boundary, but surely with the taxi driver as a witness, I would be safe. While waiting for the cab, I did what I could for my face, which wasn't a lot. The honking of the cab horn 10 minutes later spurred me to do a final visual check outside, then an awkward sprint to the safety of the cab. I didn't really relax until we were a block away from the house. The driver was female, which put me on edge, but after asking for my destination, she lost interest in me. 15 minutes later, as we were approaching the destination property, I realized I'd stuffed up. The keys to the property were inside my briefcase, back home in the back seat of my car, which was still in the garage. If I told the cab to return, I'd be at least 25 minutes late for my appointment, and the client may well be violently resentful of being stood up a second time and demand my head from the agency. I decided to keep the appointment and muddle my way through it. I could show the client the outside and claim some bureaucratic bungle with the keys. I'd almost certainly miss out on the sale, but hopefully wouldn't be fired. I tried Dave's number once more before we pulled into the driveway of the house. In the end, I had to wait half an hour for the bloody client. She, too, arrived by cab. She was a tall, dark-haired woman in her 30s, quite good-looking unless her eyes, which were hidden behind sunglasses, let her down. She was carrying one of those huge handbags that seemed to be this season's fashion staple. When she saw me, she looked down at a piece of paper in her right hand before stuffing it into her bag while walking toward me. She seemed to swallow my excuse about the key fiasco, but looked annoyed as I explained the best I could offer was a trip around the outside, peering in the windows. Luckily, I knew everything about the property by heart, so I didn't have to refer to any notes, which were also in the briefcase. I had it in the back of my mind that if it didn't sell quickly, the owners might drop the price so that Dave and I could buy it. It was a lovely, leafy neighborhood populated by young urban professionals. Dave and I would fit right in. We reached the backyard, where I pointed out the roomy artist's studio, set apart from the main house. After I finished listing off its features, I walked to the window of what I knew to be the master bedroom, peering in through a gap in the curtains to see how good the view was. I heard an incongruous sound behind me. In hindsight, I would describe it as a snicking sound. Swinging around, I saw the client was holding one of those telescopic baton things you see advertised in women's magazines for personal defense. The client's face had morphed from pretty to screwed-up hatred. I think she hissed before she swung the baton at me with all her might, aimed right at my head. It hurt agonizingly as it hit my hastily raised forearms, and I actually heard a bone snap, and I think so did the enraged woman. The anger seemed to evaporate from her, and she just stood and watched as I screamed when I lowered my arm, and the pain truly hit. She must have had some residual anger, though, as she lashed out at the side of my head. I absorbed most of the blow on my uninjured arm, but it still knocked me to the ground. The wild woman must have left, because when I came out of my daze, still on the ground, she was gone, and I was all alone. She might have been gone, but the thing that must have fallen out of her handbag when she pulled the baton out was not. It was the piece of paper I'd seen her stuffing into her bag when she first arrived. It lay on the ground, face up. It was a photograph, about A5 size, I suppose. It was a familiar image, one of my favorites. One that I'd taken. One I was totally confused on how the hell this crazy woman attained a copy of. It was a selfie I'd taken about 3 months or so ago. My phone was in my outstretched hand when I took the shot. Despite everything, I was still impressed I'd had the wherewithal to press the button at the time, and the good framing of the shot was pure luck. I was on my knees and elbows at the time, with my back pointed to the ceiling. Looking past my face, obviously, in rapture, you could clearly make out John kneeling behind me with an animalistic expression on his face. It was the perfect photo, taken at the perfect moment, and had given me numerous excitement to it since. I still remembered the seedy motel room we'd paid cash for the day of the most spectacular time of my life. The picture that woman had used to identify me. Judging by her anger, was Mrs. John, I presumed. I'd never asked John about his wife, just as we'd never spoken about Dave. I'd just not considered it relevant enough to think about it before. Cradling my broken arm, I rolled to the sitting position. No internal debate on whether to call an ambulance this time. I did so. No police, though. That way led to the exposure of my affairs, which led to Dave finding out, which led somewhere dreadful. How the hell John's psycho, baton-wielding wife had gotten a hold of that photo was the question that occupied my mind while I staggered to meet the ambulance at the front of the property. I'd never shared that photo with any other person or any other device, not even John. Had my phone been hacked? It was the same triage nurse at the hospital, and she was going to call the police, but I talked her out of it, convincing her it was an accident. She looked at my arm and the scratches on my face and clearly didn't believe me but respected my wishes anyway, after I vigorously shook my head when she simply asked, "Husband?" They set my arm, didn't admit me, failed as much as me to alert Dave, and then bundled me into a taxi with some heavy-duty painkillers. The taxi driver was kind enough to accompany me right to my front door. He even waited while I opened it, went in, and deadbolted myself inside. Despite medical advice, I washed the painkillers down with a large, make that very large vodka, while all the while concocting a story to tell my husband. I'd left messages after 3 of the attacks on his message bank. He would be very confused and worried when he charged his phone and heard them. I tried ringing him again, failed, and then remembered my idea of sending him an email. My laptop was still in the car, and it was dark by now, so there was no way on earth that I was going to risk another attack to retrieve it. Then I remembered our old desktop computer. We'd used it before we both had laptops, and Dave, once in a blue moon, continued to use it when he wanted to see something on a larger screen. Even though mostly unused, it was still there in the study. I turned it on and then went to refill my vodka. When I got back, it had the little spinning hourglass on the screen and the word synchronizing below it. Synchronizing what? I answered a call of nature, which took a while. You try undoing a side zipper on a pair of trousers with one arm in a sling. By the time I returned to the study, the computer had finished synchronizing, and what it was synchronizing with was horribly revealed on the screen. Well, that explains that. Everything. Who those horrible women were and why they'd done what they did to me. That knowledge was almost comforting after the utter confusion of the events of the previous 24 hours. What the screensaver on our old house computer was showing, though, explained much more than that. It showed why, for the first time in forever, my husband hadn't rung me while he was away on a business trip, and why he wasn't answering his phone. Why he might never ring me again. How I'd been an arrogant woman and very probably destroyed the rest of my life. I just made it to the bathroom before I painfully puked. I touched the tender left side of my face, then felt the livid bruise and scratches on the right, before leaving the bathroom to turn off the monitor displaying the sick, devastating photos by the screensaver on the computer I hardly ever used. It was displaying the contents of my phone, more specifically, the photos on it. They were now flashing on the screen of the computer, changing every 10 seconds or so. Incongruously, photos of houses or specific interior features alternated with far more graphic ones. I remember a couple of weeks ago when my boss brought in a tech company to update our phones. I'd watched like a hawk while the technician played with mine. It was obvious to me now that at least one of the changes he'd made had caused the photos I'd ever so carefully hidden on it to be broadcast to the desktop along with the rest from my photo folder. And if they'd been seen by the old desktop, could they have... Oh no. Dave's laptop was much more modern than the old home PC. A feeling of dread stole over me as I imagined Dave looking at the 100 or so trophy photos. Photos intended for my viewing pleasure only. Photos of me and various men in various positions. Could I imagine David cropping the ones that showed my lovers' faces and printing them, taking them to my work, and comparing faces to names on their files with our receptionist, who had always had a soft spot for him? Unfortunately, yes, I could. Names led to addresses and wives. Wives who saw uncropped photos. Wives who, in my case, led to broken bones and bruises. After yet another unanswered call to my husband's phone, I trudged painfully upstairs and checked out his clothes closet. What I saw only darkened my depression. Then, braving the horrible photos on the old computer screensaver, I switched the monitor back on and logged into our online bank website. There, I saw some tiny numbers where there should have been big ones. I dropped my chin to my chest. The realization of what a spoilt, conniving, and entitled cheating woman I'd become hit me. The blow was as painful as all my physical injuries rolled into one. Not only my thinking that I deserved to treat myself to men who, visually at least, were in my league, but doing it in such a cavalier way. Being in commercial as well as domestic real estate, there was never any shortage of male clients to choose from. And I chose. Perhaps in the early days, I ensured I was super careful about my lovers. Back then, I'd had a strict no photos, videos, or trail of any kind rule. Oh, I did make a few mistakes along the way. I was almost outed by one guy who wanted to continue a relationship beyond the time it had run its course for me. That was when I decided to limit myself to married men who had as much to lose as me. But I became complacent and relaxed some of my rules when it became apparent that Dave trusted me implicitly. Mistake. Big mistake. Huge. I should have stuck to the no-photo rule. I kicked myself for my absolute arrogance, wondering how I could have allowed it. I'd become the popular girl I'd dreamed of being in school, and somehow had to validate that popularity by sleeping with all the jocks. My arrogance was in thinking my marriage was guaranteed to survive my true nature being revealed to my husband. Now, I'm not stupid enough to have believed Dave couldn't ever discover my hobbies, but I'd long ago developed a plan for that eventuality, one that I was confident Dave would accept. After all, he would never get a replacement anywhere near my caliber and would surely eventually forgive me. My plan depended on him only knowing about one lover. I'd been weak this one time, I'd say. He was a master seducer, I'd sob. It will never happen again, I promise. Now come to bed and let me share all the things I've learned that I've been keeping to myself. Well, myself and my lovers. I'd even planned to offer him my supposedly back. I'd holler and scream like a born-again virgin, and he'd never know it was now a well-trodden path, an oft-used reward for especially deserving boyfriends. My mind was wandering. Maybe it was just an attempt at self-preservation on my part, delaying the inevitable conclusion that Dave wasn't going to forgive me. He hadn't discovered me in bed with one other guy, triggering my long-rehearsed reaction. How could I have anticipated that he would cyber-catch me with scores of my lovers at the same time? In the bruised face here and now, I screamed. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.